Ma'am, we have 2 minutes left.
Hello. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, yeah. Camera on. Okay. 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 Tell me when to start. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Shop starting scheme. Shop. Stop. Stop. Yeah. I have stopped. Yeah.
You can hear me on the laptop.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, ma'am, are you ready?
Offline now.
Yeah, yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello.
Hello. Should I start, Abhijit?
Yes, you
Thank you
can.
very much.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, good afternoon, friends. This is Dr. Bela Bhatt, OBGYN and fetal medicine consultant from Mumbai. At the outset, let me all wish you all a very safe and healthy homestay during this lockdown time. And let me congratulate Lilac Insight Lilac Insight for taking such an important topic of clinical and legal issues in ultrasound screening in this peri-COVID time. Okay, so our topic is a very relevant topic in today's scenario, that is clinical and legal issues in ultrasound screening in pregnancy in peri-COVID times. Obviously, I'll be dealing with the clinical issues and Dr. Hitesh Bhatt, medical legal consultant, will deal with the legal issues in the same. Well, this term peri-COVID time has been coined because we all know that lockdown or no lockdown, for this entire coming year, we have to deal with this invisible enemy, and that is Corona. Well, I'm not going to bore you with all the slides of Corona. You all have enough information about how it spreads. But this one slide is important because our entire ultrasound screening is based on how the COVID-19 spreads. So respiratory droplets from coughing, sneezing, loud conversation, and direct contact are responsible for the spread of SARS-CoV-2. And this happens when body fluid touch another person's eye, nose, or mouth, or an incision, laceration, or abrasion. Well, As an obstetrician or sonologist, we are worried about risk to mother, other patients, and healthcare providers, which includes ourselves and our staff, of course. So, three basic things which are the mainstay in prevention of corona have to be remembered, that is social distancing, hand hygiene, and PPEs. Well, why there is so much concern about ultrasound in particular? We all know that usually the ultrasound examination rooms are very small. There is absent or restricted natural ventilations. Windows are not there. There is just a single AC there in that room. Or in some places, there is a central air conditioning unit and there is no HEPA filtration. So that is the reason these all things will put us at higher risk. Not only this, usually when we are scanning on the abdomen of the patient. So there is insufficient distancing between patient and examiner. It is said that we have to maintain social distancing and there has to be 2 meters distance between two people, which is practically impossible in a sonography room. Coughing, sneezing, loud conversation, anxious deep breathing, sighing by the patient and attendant is all known by the patient in the sonography room. Long examination times. What do I mean by this? Well, especially nuchal scans, anomaly scans, biophysical profiles will all take long time. So many times you have to take the patient once again. And this is the reason why the risk of exposure to COVID increases. Transvaginal and invasive procedures, repeated handling of transducers, machine desktops, keyboard, touch screen, and the recording devices. Well, let me tell you, the routine ultrasound screening, which was there, which was existing, which I now tell as pre-COVID era, because now what we'll have will be COVID and post-COVID era in which things are going to change. So what was there before COVID came? That was routine ultrasound screening. First was the viability scan, then 11 to 13 weeks nuchal scan with combined test, 18 to 20 weeks anomaly scan, fetal echo at 23 to 24 weeks, growth scan at 28 weeks, and then Doppler at 34 to 36. These were the optimum ultrasound screening in pregnancy. But we all know that things are not going to be the same again after this corona pandemic. So what do we do? How do we go about it in corona and post-corona period? So then we have some guidelines to fall back. Hello. So we have some guidelines to fall back on. And these are the guidelines for antenatal visits, which are WHO guidelines and RCOG guidelines. And there are some obstetric ultrasound specific guidelines, which is given recently by ISUOG and SFM. This is Society of Fetal Medicine Guidelines. Now, ISUOG mentions that PPEs differ from country to country and region to region. And so the local guidance is needed. And here, our Society of Fetal Medicine in India has come to help us. And they have given India-specific guidelines for ultrasound establishment. And then when we are screening in pregnancy, we have to keep all these guidelines at the back of our mind. Now, the latest guideline of WHO mentions about 8 minimum antenatal visits. This was before corona pandemic. But RCOG has given COVID-19 pandemic specific guidelines, which mentions that there should be 6 minimum face-to-face antenatal visits. Why do I mention face-to-face? Because now we have to separate telemedicine and face-to-face visits. It is telemedicine is going to come. It is going to be there in our practice henceforth. So RCOG mentions that at least 6 minimum face-to-face antenatal visits have to be there. And it also specifies that you should try and combine clinical examination and ultrasonography visits. So what does it suggest in this? It suggests that after first booking visit, whenever you call the patient for 11 to 13 weeks visit, it should combine your clinical examination, your nuchal scan, your double marker, and your ANC profile. So your clinical checkup, your sonography, and laboratory, all three are to be done in the same visit. Now, this is possible when either an obstetrician herself or himself is doing sonography, or in a setup like a multi-speciality hospital where you have obstetrician, laboratory setup, as well as a sonologist in the same setting. So the appointment should be given in such a way that all three things can be done in the same visit. Patient doesn't have to come repeatedly, so the exposure to the patient is least. Another important visit RCOG mentions is that 18 to 20 weeks visit should also be combined with your anomaly scan and laboratory if you want to repeat CBC, urine. So clinical examination, lab and anomaly. These two visits are very, very important when you have to combine your clinical visit with your sonography. So the next question is, if we have to restrict our triage, what are the scans, what is the priority for scans, and how do we decide as to who needs the scan? So there are three categories of scans which SFM has specified. One is scans without delay, then second category is scans that may be delayed, and the third one is scans may be avoided completely. So let's look at all three categories in detail. So the scans without delay, excuse me. So the scans without delay are the ones first trimester bleeding PV. So if the patient has heavy bleeding, again this specify that the patient has heavy bleeding per vagina with pain, then it has to be the scan has to be done without delay. If you have suspicion of ectopic pregnancy, you want to rule out, again you have to do scan without delay. Antepartum hemorrhage after 20 weeks of pregnancy, scan is required. Then there are decision making scans. Now this word is important, from 28 to 41 weeks. And the examples are when the patient with the baby is having severe fetal growth restriction with some Doppler changes like absent end-diastolic flow or reversal of end-diastolic flow. Friends, you know that scanning is must, because this will help us decide when to deliver the baby. So scans may be required once a week, twice a week, depending upon the findings on Doppler. What are the changes are there on the Doppler scan? Then fetal anemia. There are many reasons of fetal anemia, but the most common is the RH isoimmunized mother. And this again, if the mother is RH isoimmunized, it is only MCA PSC monitoring which is going to tell us whether this baby requires intrauterine transfusion or not. So these are all decision-making scans, and they have to be done without delay. The 36 weeks growth and Doppler scan is a useful triaging tool for early delivery decision and may need to be carried out, although FIGO recommends clinical assessment and delivery during a pandemic. So there is no clear-cut demarcation here whether it is to be done or not. But then there is a scan which can definitely be delayed. So dating scans, see, sometimes we do dating scan at 9-10 weeks also, just to be specific that the gestational week is corresponding with the weeks of gestation. Now these can be definitely delayed in this lockdown time and in the coming few months, so that they can be merged with the 11 to 13 weeks nuchal scan. We all know that nuchal scan is going to give us a very good CRL, and the dating is most appropriate in this 11 to 13 week scan. And so dating scan can be delayed. Not only that, this 11 to 13 week scan is very, very important in this COVID-19 era, when it will also give us information about the aneuploidy screening, preeclampsia screening, some of the anomalies, 60% of anomalies. And at this stage, 11 to 13 weeks itself, you will be able to segregate your patients into low risk and high risk categories, and you'll be able to decide as to which patients are to be called frequently and which are the patients which are low risk and should not be called frequently. So this 11 to 13 can becomes very, very important in this COVID era. Then there are growth scans, which you feel that if the clinically you don't feel that fetal growth restriction is there, the growth is okay, then it can be delayed. And fetal medicine procedures. Now again in this, if there are on your combined test at 11 to 13 weeks, if you feel that the patient is falling in the high risk, or after counseling the patient wishes to go for invasive testing, then it may be delayed in this lockdown period. It may be delayed for 3 to 4 weeks till the lockdown opens and amniocentesis can be offered. But again, there is no clear-cut demarcation here. Suppose if the patient, both the parents are having a thalassemia minor and they want to make sure at 11 to 13 weeks only with CVS, whether the baby is suffering from thalassemia major or not, CVS can be done. Well, friends, we are doing cesarean sections also with due precautions. So why not CVS? So in most indicated patients, even now CVS can be done. Where it can be delayed, it should be delayed, and can be amniocentesis can be offered. So this is about the invasive procedures. Scans that can be completely avoided. Well, ultrasound for reassurance only. I'm sure you must be getting patients who have been telling in this pre-COVID era that, ma'am, I just want to be sure that my baby is fine and the growth is fine and the fluid is fine, and can you just check it? So these are the scans at present which can be completely avoided based on your clinical examination. If you feel that everything is going fine, then these scans can be avoided at present. SFN also mentions that transvaginal scans should be completely avoided. But friends, I personally feel that they cannot be completely avoided, because many times during nuchal scan, we also look at the anomalies. So sometimes because of the fetal positioning or maternal obesity or scars, it is difficult to do transabdominal examination only. So in few percentage of patients wherein we can't look at the anomaly properly, anatomy properly, fetal anatomy, we have to resort to the transvaginal. But yes, I agree that the use of transvaginal USG should be reduced as far as possible. Now, some important points. Second trimester scans should be given priority over first trimester scans. So what do I mean by this? Mainly, this is for those centers where there are too many appointments given on the same day. Here, the anomaly scans should be given priority over nuchal scans, because we all know that the deadline of 20 weeks should not be crossed, though I'm sure in post-COVID era, there'll be some relaxation and from the government or courts in this regard, but at present we have to follow that. So we should try and finish our anomaly scans before 20 weeks, and nuchal scans can be given a little later appointment. During lockdown period, if the nuchal patient cannot come because of lockdown for nuchal scan, NIPT can be offered, and these patients can be offered a little early anomaly scan at around 16 to 17 weeks, just to see that we are not missing any gross norm. If the patient has missed the first trimester combined test completely because of this lockdown thing, then second trimester anomaly scan at around 18 weeks with a quad marker should be offered. It's a good option for these patients, in which we can get aneuploidy screening also with genetic sonogram. Now, this slide is extremely important from COVID-19 point of view, patient scheduling. Well, we all are used to, of course, we have been taking appointments for special sonographies, but we are all used to walking patients. Now, what is most important is advanced scheduling is necessary, and walking patients are to be discouraged. Why? There is a specific reason for that, because we need to ask the history of symptoms and TOCC. I'll tell you what TOCC is. I'm sure many of you must be knowing this about this. But here, one important thing is we have to train our staff to ask this history, because as they are used to take consents on LSCS and many procedures wherein they are not very sensitized as to, they have to explain each and everything about it. Here, it is the history of TOCC, that is travel, occupation, contact, or cluster of COVID-19 has to be asked in detail, and for that you have to train the staff that only after asking about any symptom, that is cough, fever, shortness of breath, or TOCC, has to be asked on phone, and if it is negative, then and then you should call the patient to your particular clinic or hospital, or else the patient has to be referred to a COVID hospital. Not only this, even if you have asked the history on phone, whenever the patient comes to a clinic, there has to be a triage station outside the clinic, where again the patient should be inquired. There has to be a specific person who asks the history for with all PPs, who asks the history of symptoms and TOCC, and then only after this screening, patient should be allowed to enter in this clinic. I know this all sounds very difficult, but this is what the guidelines are, and the guidelines are to keep us, our patient and staff, safe, and to prevent COVID transmission. So now, based on this history of symptoms and TOCC, the patients can be triaged into three groups, that is A, B, and C category. Category A is the one where the patient is asymptomatic, TOCC negative, and no widespread community transmission. These are the patients which can be taken in standalone USG establishments where the scans can be done with appropriate PPE. Consent I'm not touching here, whether to take or not, and all that will be discussed by Dr. Hitesh Bhatt, who's a legal consultant. And the other two categories are B and C. Now, the B category is one in which patient is asymptomatic, but TOCC is positive. Either the patient has traveled out of a country or maybe from Delhi, patient has come, occupation is such, or contact with a COVID patient, or cluster wherein patient has gone and attended some sport event or some religious event just before a few days and within last 15 to 20 days. So when this history is positive, that falls in the category B, and category C is one in which the patient is symptomatic or TOCC positive with widespread community transmission. So obviously category B and C have to be referred to a COVID-19 hospital where facilities for complete PPE is available and they have the facility to deal with these patients. Now here comes a tricky thing because TOCC is something that we ask from patient. So if you have little bit of doubt whether the patient has given history correctly or not, it is your responsibility to decide as to how much PPE to use. So what is given in the guidelines about the PPEs, that is personal protective equipments to be used based on symptoms and TOCC categorization, is that for TOCC A, which is safe in a small standalone as ultrasound establishment, clothing has to be work clothes, face mask can be surgical or medical mask, hand hygiene is, of course, yes, but eye protection, hair cover, isolation gowns may not be required, is what is given in the guidelines. Whereas in category B and C, where the patient has to be referred, everything has to be there, right from work clothes to face mask and N95, hand hygiene, goggles, hair cover, that is cap, isolation gown, everything has to be there. Staffing has to be, besides scan, minimal staff has to be there, maybe only just one sister in a small ultrasound room is what is advisable. Even the relative should not be allowed in the ultrasound room. But as I said, there's a little tricky thing between when you have to differentiate between category A and B. So considering every patient as a potential carrier, PPEs for sonologists and supportive staff, that is your sister, have to be individualized is what is my opinion. Patient has to wear mask and only patient should be allowed. The relative can wait outside the clinic or in the car, and in the your waiting area also you should have strapping of the seat so that there is enough distance between the patients waiting. Appointment should be given in such a way that maybe half an hourly, 1 hourly appointment, so that there is no crowding in the reception area. I know working like this is very, very difficult with all PPEs on, but friends, at present we have no other way out to fight with this virus. Venue sanitization. Friends, I know I'm going very theoretical, but each and every point is very important and we can't omit any of this. ECOG has given safety committee position statement for specifically obstetrics and gynec scans in the context of COVID-19. What does it say? It says that the COVID-19 virus remains on dry surfaces for 48 to 96 hours, almost 4 days. So if you have taken a patient and if the patient is carrier, the virus is going to stay in your ultrasound room for 96 hours. So considering that, what all precautions are to be taken has been given in this guideline. USG room has to be cleaned with LLD, that is low level disinfectant, which are these: 71% ethanol, 0.5% hydrogen peroxide, 0.1% sodium hypochlorite. Now, I feel that in our setup, small standalone ultrasound establishment, this is something which is easy to make. In your own clinic, 0.1% sodium hypochlorite with bleaching powder, and that can be used as LLD. So USG room has to be cleaned with LLD. Hard surface, the chair has to be made up of hard surface, which can be cleaned easily. Minimum number of transducers should be connected to the USG machine. There have to be disposable sheets and pillow covers which need to be changed after each scan. So ultrasound cables, transducers should be cleaned every morning and after each scan. So everything that I have highlighted in red is something which is something new in this peri-COVID era. It has to be cleaned, first being cleaned every day, but now it has to be cleaned after each scan. Patient's couch should be wiped with LLD after each examination. So once the patient goes out, the sheet has to be removed, the couch has to be cleaned with LLD. Keyboard, cord, screen where you have touched needs to be cleaned after each examination. At the end of the day, soil linen to be disposed of using 2 pairs of gloves, room to be cleaned with LLD, and hand washing has to be done for 20 seconds. As far as equipment sanitization is concerned, transducer surfaces and cords should be wiped with an equipment vendor approved LLD. So now this is very important that you need to contact your equipment vendor, and the LLD which is approved by them can be used. Commonly approved agents include 70% alcohol, ammonia, 10% bleach, diluted Sidex, etc., etc. Sterilim is something which is available and can be used because it has 75% alcohol concentration. But again, I would like to advise you that equipment vendor approval should be taken before you use any LLD. Coming towards the end of my talk, adequate staff must be available to accelerate preparation of reports. We have the habit of calling patients afterwards to get the reports, and I know at present there is difficult time because you don't get adequate staff. So many staffs cannot come because of lockdown. After lockdown opens also, you don't know how many staffs you'll be able to get. So it's a practical problem, but then you should try and accelerate as much as possible so that repeatedly patient doesn't have to come to hospital. Specifically shown these guidelines because these are the recent guidelines that have come in March and April from RCOG, ECOG and SFM in India-oriented guidelines. And these are definitely very, very useful for all those sonologists who are going to do sonography on their own, or obstetricians who are going to advise sonography for their patients. Well, we know that the best defense against any outbreak is a strong health system. And so, friends, we all have to be strong, and we have to make our health system as strong as possible with whatever possible resources that we have at hand. And with this, we'll be able to fight the corona. I'm sure, like me, everybody is waiting for this ray of hope in this dark period of COVID. And I'm sure we are all going to see a very bright day like this, where COVID will no more exist. I think we'll have to wait till the vaccine for COVID-19 comes, and that will at least take a year or so. So till then, we have to keep fighting with whatever is possible, and with whatever difficult time that we have, whatever resources we have. With that, we will keep fighting. So with this positive hope, I end my talk here. Thanks for patient hearing. And I think Abhishek, hello. Hello. Dr. Hitesh Bhatt will now take over. Hello. Abhishek, can you hear us? Dr. Hitesh Bhatt is now taking over. He is going to start with the legal aspect regarding the ultrasound screening in this peri-COVID time.
Hello.
Abhishek?
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, friends. So there is no response from the response team. So I'll start. And first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I am Dr. Hitesh Bhatt. I'm basically, by qualification, I am gynecologist, and a lawyer. By profession, I'm advocate, and in peri-COVID time, I'm house husband, just like housewife. So this is my short and sweet introduction, and with this, we will start the medico-legal issues in sonography. So friends,
Hello, Chaitra. You have to share your screen. So he has, I think, you can't see the screen. You have to share. Okay. Okay. Can you now?
see now?
Yeah. Okay. Slideshow. I think he is clicking, but it is not. Slideshow is not starting only. Just a minute. Yeah. He can't.
The computer has frozen actually.
I think the. Just a minute. There is some technical issue, so yeah, we'll have to. He's not able to share his slide. I mean, slide share is not starting.
I think it will now. Okay.
I think he'll be able to do now. Just a minute. Okay. I think yeah.
It is done.
Yeah, it is done.
Fine. So
He's starting.
Can you see now?
Chaitra, can you see now?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. So, friends, the medical cases are constantly increasing. We all know the reasons. Now, first of all, we will understand what the negligence is. Then it is easy to understand the other aspects because so many questions are based on the negligence. So, let us first understand what the negligence mean. The negligence is defined as to do something which a prudent man, or you can say prudent doctor in similar situation, will not do. That is called act of commission. And the second part of definition is not to do something which a prudent doctor in similar situation will do, and that is called act of omission. So you have to act according to the prudent doctor, and prudent doctor is supposed to act in accordance with the present time and present guidelines. So we can say how the prudent doctor would have acted, that can be shown from something given in the textbook. If it is a practice in nearby medical college, if it is accepted practice by some colleague, or if something has appeared in an index journal. The expectation of standard of care are different from a general practitioner and a consultant, and the place of treatment given. Also, the time of treatment, like in present time, whatever advice you give can be different from what advice you give in a normal circumstances. So it also depends upon at what time you are giving what advice, and it should match with majority of your colleague, and then your practice will be considered as a standard practice. There can be modes of treatment. There can be two school of thought. As Dr. Bela also said, that you can do either a CVS or you can go for amnio. Like there can be two school of thought, and you can do anything which is accepted by one group of doctors. Error of judgment is no negligence. See, you can see these pictures. On left hand side, the pictures are fake. The right hand side, it is the real picture, and there can be error of judgment. There is one more example of error of judgment like this. This is also error of judgment that can happen. The error of judgment is no negligence. Accident, something happens accidentally, is also justified, and it is not negligence. But to prove accident, all the answers to all these questions should be in your favor. Who does it? That means who has done the procedure, on whom it was done. That means the patient selection. Where was it done? That means the place of treatment given. When was it done? The timing of the procedure and how was it done, the method of the procedure done. If all these answers is in your favor and still something goes wrong, it can be said that you are not negligent and it was an accident. Foreseeability. Foreseeability is something for which a doctor can be made liable. If something is foreseeable, see, if I do something today and if it causes damage to the patient later in life, very late in life, still I am liable for that particular damage. If the condition which I could not diagnose at this point of time has led to some problem in future. We are skipping these slides. Contributory negligence. Contributory negligence is something which a contribution into the negligence from the patient side. If you have advised something to the patient and patient do not do it, then patient is contributory liable for that particular damage, and that saves the doctor. But to plead contributory negligence, it is always documented in your record, and you should be able to produce that record in the court of law. Then only the contributory negligence will work. Suppose you advise patient some test. If patient says no, they don't want to get it done, please record it, please mention it. And then if something happens to the patient, you can always show that, see, this is what we have advised to the patient and patient refused it, and that is why this problem has occurred. And that will give you a defense of contributory negligence in the court of law. I hope I am clear about that. But again, I am telling, to plead contributory negligence, you must have a proper documentation. Vicarious liability. Vicarious liability is the liability which comes onto the employer when their employee do not follow the, or their employee are negligent. Why it is so? What is the mistake, or what is the why the employer is liable for employee's mistake? There are two principles in law. The first thing is, he who does an act to another in law deemed to have done it himself. So if I tell my nurse to give injection, in eyes of law, I have given the injection, and let the superior be responsible. These are the two principles based on which the vicarious liability principle is based. So if you are employer, then there is no defense. But if you are employee, your employer can be vicariously liable for your negligence. Now, after understanding negligence in nutshell, let us come to the issues which we face in general sonography. We are seeing such news in the newspaper, say test okay, but baby born with one arm or one kidney and so on. Now in the court, one list was presented in one of the case, missed anomalies that would be difficult to justify in the court. That means these are the list of anomalies which is possible to diagnose by a prudent doctor. And this is the list. This list says that these are the anomalies which usually a prudent doctor will not miss. So if you miss this, you can be implicated as negligent. So it is better not to miss all these anomalies. If you want to prevent yourself from medico-legal problems, there are 6 ways. First is prevention of complication, help of medico-legal service, communication, documentation, medico-legal help. And the 6th thing I will tell you at the end of my talk. Prevention of complication. How can you prevent complication from happening? By following these proper standards, by remaining in touch with the standard practice, by continuous training for yourself and your staff, and by involving colleagues in case of doubt, and by referring the patient in time. You have to take seriously patient suspicion and feeling, and whenever possible, follow their suggestion. If patient says, doctor, please do this, or please do this test, or please allow me to have second opinion, let them do it. And whenever possible, if something is not possible, you have to convince the patient, or you have to report it for contributory negligence of the patient. In lookalike conditions, do not hesitate to take second opinion. If you feel something is not diagnosable, or it looks like something else, you have doubt, you have some differential diagnosis in your mind, always refer such patient for second opinion, and don't shy out from doing that. help of preventive medico-legal service. There are medico-legal services available. You have to have the opinion on that very moment. Afterwards, whatever you try to change, it is not possible. So if something happens today, try to take medico-legal help at that point of time. Third important thing is communication. And communication includes two things, consent and counseling. And this is very much important. It is said that more you talk with your patient in your chamber, less you will have to talk against her in the courtroom. So you have to talk, you have to explain everything. If you tell today that this complication can occur, and if that complication occurs, patient may take it. But if something happens, something goes wrong, and then you try to explain her that, see, this is written in our textbook, it can happen in 1 in 10 cases. But nobody is going to believe that. So you have to tell something beforehand and not afterwards. And that is what communication is all about. Never give assurance about the result. And that we will see in the cases which we are going to discuss. So never give assurance about the result. Always tell results in percentage. You may not have particular incidents in your hospital, like during cesarean section, nobody has died on table in my hospital. But still, I cannot say to the next patient that 100% nothing will happen. I have to give percentage that yes, all over the world, 1 out of 10,000 patients may die on table. That is what I have to tell. Never give assurance about the result. Beauty can convert into beast, and beast can convert into beauty in no time. And you don't have to give any assurance about the result. Document. I told you, and again I'm telling you, you have to prepare documents. How to prepare, what all to prepare, how and when to give it to the patient is again a different talk. But still, the point here is you have to make proper documents, as we have learned during our residency time. Documentation can be handwritten, typed, or computerized. So there is no doubt about it. You can keep documents in any format, but there has to be document. And under Clinical Establishment Act, they have said what is medical document, and they have given list of all these things. This is included in medical documents. It is not only your case paper, not only your report, but it includes everything. Outpatient register, inpatient register, operation theater register, labor room register, MTP register, case sheets, medical legal register, laboratory register, a discharge summary, medical certificate, complaint register, birth register, death register, everything, whatever is related to that patient's treatment, that is called medical documentation. Never alter the records. Whatever you do, you cannot make tiger out of an elephant. So please do not try to change the report afterwards if something is given to the patient. You can always write something at that point of time. If you remember something, or if you have some doubt, you can make a note. Or if you want to change something at that very moment, you just cut it. Do not put whitener. Just cut the word in such a way that the other person can read the original word, and you write the correct word below. That is how, and you have to put a small signature beside that. That is how legally you can correct or alter your mistakes. But never make it too frequent. Your original writing should not be less than the mistakes or the cuts. So make the neat and clean records. It is better to type it again and throw the old one into dustbin. Don't give both the reports to the patient, and never alter afterwards. We are very poor at record keeping. As I told you, record keeping is altogether a different talk, but still I must tell you that we are very poor. We don't write things in the way it should be. When I am getting cases, doctors do explain to me what actually happened in their operation theater or with the patient for 1 hour on a telephone. But when I ask for the actual case paper, they hand over me just 2 pages. So that is not documentation. Whatever you can speak, you should be able to write as well. Good documentation is a good defense. Poor documentation is a poor defense, and no documentation means no defense in the eyes of law. Now let us see 2 cases to make you understand that how courts look at the negligence, because most of the questions which we get are on the negligence, and they ask me that if this has happened, who is negligent? So let us see how courts decide who is negligent. There is a case of Senthil Scan Center versus Shanti Sridharan. What happened in this case? Mrs. Shanti was pregnant and she approached the Senthil Scan Center. Scan was carried out 3 times. All reports read single live pregnancy with no anomalies found. The baby girl was delivered who had stump below the elbow and no forearm. 20 lakh rupees compensation was asked for. Now, doctor's defense was The scan findings are not 100% accurate. There is always a possibility of anomaly. There is no deficiency on the service from our side. And the state commission decided the case that there is deficiency on the part of scan center. Doctor may not be negligent, but the report was given as no anomaly because doctor said that the report was typed by the staff of the scan center and it is not my mistake. So 5 lakh rupees compensation and 3 lakh rupees as cost were awarded in that era in late 90s. Now appeal was filed in the National Commission, that is the higher court than the state commission. There the book was presented, Diagnostic USG of Fetal Anomalies. It is stated that technical limitations produced by the fetal position, maternal obesity, amniotic fluid may limit the ultrasound evaluation. This is partial anomaly and could have been developed later in pregnancy due to amniotic band syndrome or something. And National Commission said that doctor and scan center both are negligent because it is not the person who has given the report, but doctor also has signed the report. So even if there is a mistake of the scan center in printing the report, doctor has to see it before signing it. So both are negligent, and center has faulted in giving the report correctly when they have mentioned repeatedly there was no fetal anomaly 3 times. And they approved the previous compensation which was awarded. So one cannot believe, they also further said that one cannot believe that such an anomaly can escape from the scrutiny of the specialist. Now the case went to the Supreme Court. Now see how Supreme Court looked at the same case. This is how the courts decide. There is no rule of thumb that who is negligent. So Supreme Court said that patient had not put any material on record to prove his case, and it is entirely dependent upon his oral assertion that detection of anomaly was possible. As I told you in the definition of negligence, that what you have done, if it is matching with what prudent doctor would have done, then you are not negligent. So patient has to say that what prudent doctor would not have missed, whether prudent doctor would have missed this anomaly or not. There was nothing on record from the patient side. It is just patient's assertion that there is negligence because there is anomaly. There was no evidence as to how the scan center or doctor did not do anything which ought to have been done or did something which ought not to have been done. So that is what is the definition of negligence all about. No expert evidence was put by the patient for their favor. Sonography is not the perfect depiction of the fetus, and scan cannot be 100% conclusive. And there is no evidence to show that the failure to detect anomaly was out of negligence on the part of doctor conducting ultrasound. And both the judgment of the previous court were put aside, and the case was decided in favor of doctor by the Supreme Court. The learning points here are Supreme Court judgment stating that sonography is not 100% conclusive. That gives us great relief. But the courts in the deciding factor in this particular case was their patient did not put any material on record to substantiate their claim. If patient would have done that, if patient would have given some other doctor's opinion that yes, this can be diagnosed with most accuracy or in almost more than 60-70% of cases, then the case would have different result. Supreme Court also stated that in that judgment that doctor must bring to that task no less expertise, skill and care than any ordinary member of the profession they are doing. So this is how the court will look at the negligence. Now see the similar case again decided by the State Commission and National Commission and the Supreme Court, and how it changes. It changed from the late 90s case to 2011, and that is case of Archana versus Tarun Kumar. The State Commission Dispute Redressal Commission, there the case was filed. Sonography was done 3 times like the previous case. Baby born with no forearm like the previous case. The defense of the doctor was the complainant approached to him when she was 16 to 17 weeks of the gestation, and on second time at 26 to 27 weeks of gestation. And no pregnancy could have been terminated after 20 weeks of gestation period. So when it was diagnosed, or when it could have been diagnosed most accurately at 26-27 weeks or after 20 weeks, when the fetus is big enough, there is no possibility of terminating that pregnancy. That is what the doctor said. he did only Doppler and no level 2 scan was done for anomaly. That was his second defense. And sonography is not 100% foolproof. That again he said, just like the previous case. The district forum dismissed the complaint based on the expert opinion, and the complainant did not produce any expert evidence, just like the previous case, because that case was given here as an authority. But when it went to the Supreme Court, now the Supreme Court said, the same court which decided the previous case, now Supreme Court said, radiologist opined that the fetus was normal in all aspects because the report said no anomaly found. It is undisputable that she gave birth to a child who did not have upper part of the left forearm. The expert report relied upon by the district forum. The district forum had relied on the expert opinion. The expert opinion was also produced that this anomaly can be missed. They said that the deformity was undetectable through ultrasound, was either wrong or negligent in giving opinion. The court said the experts were negligent in giving their opinion. And they further said that in the present scenario, the expert opinion is not found helpful to decide the controversy between the parties. In the case at hand, the expert report takes backseat as the case appears to be covered under res ipsa locator. What is res ipsa locator? The thing speaks for itself. That means on one hand, your report says that there is no anomaly. On the other hand, the baby is not having one arm. So in such scenario, usually the liability is on the complainant to prove their claim. Just like the previous case, the Supreme Court said that patient could not prove their case by putting some evidence. But when the principle of res ipsa locator is applied by the court, the liability shifts on the person of who is in defending position. He has to tell that he did everything to not to miss this anomaly, rather than patient proving it that doctor did nothing to prove this anomaly, so to rule out this anomaly. So the principle of res ipsa locator was put, and the court said that it is observed that where negligence is evident, the principle of res ipsa locator should operate, and the complainant doesn't have to prove anything. They just have to show two things: the report and the baby. The things prove itself, and the liability shifts onto the defense now to say that they are not negligent. And 10 lakh rupees compensation was given because doctor could not prove himself as non-negligent. So the important practical tips from these two cases are: always order investigation before 20 weeks. Always give various options to the patient for investigation. Always correlate your finding of investigation clinically and advise further test. Maintain copy of OPD records. Always mention possibility of certain condition in percentage. No advertisement of the center to solicit the patient. Never write something which you have not examined. If you have not seen all 4 limbs, do not write no anomaly found. You can write left hand was not seen. You can always write that if something is not seen. But do not write assuming that when you see one limb, don't assume that the second limb will be there. No loose comment about the colleague, and do not help patient out of the way when there is anomaly detected later in pregnancy. Refer them to government hospital. Always examine female patient in presence of a female nurse. Do not do this. Here the doctor is checking his mail and patient feels that he is taking picture. Do not make your gesture in such a way that patient will have some doubt and some clue to file a case against you. Now in peri-COVID time, there are few issues we have to discuss along with this negligence. The consent part. There is a lot of things are said about declaration. We have to take declaration from the patient that they may get infection from the hospital or from a doctor, and I will not hold hospital and doctor accountable for the same. To my opinion, I always say that it is not mandatory because consents are of two types. One is implied and one is explicit. Explicit consent can be written and oral. Now, here in present time, peri-COVID time, the consent is implied. Everybody knows that they can get the infection. First thing. Second thing, we do not want to put in their mind by this consent that they can get infection from the hospital. If suppose, God forbid, they become COVID positive from a vegetable vendor, they will definitely blame the hospital because you have taken the consent. Why to put that doubt in their mind? And when the things are implied, there is no need for such consent. Suppose I travel in a taxi, the taxi driver never takes consent from me that we can meet with an accident and I may die, because there is an implied consent. Everybody knows that accident can happen. Similarly, in present time, everybody knows that COVID can happen. It is pandemic, and we do not have to waste time and exchange of document that can carry infection as well. So this also is a concern for not taking this consent. Of course, where there is special knowledge to you, then the patient, then you have to take explicit consent, like in surgery. When I am doing medical termination of pregnancy by dilatation and evacuation, I'm not doing it now, I'm advocate, but I'm just telling, if I am doing that, patient cannot assume that cleaning of uterus can lead to perforation in the intestine. It is impossible for them to think about that. In that kind of spatial knowledge, only doctors have. And in that situation, you are supposed to give that spatial knowledge to the patient in a written format, and that is called the explicit written consent. And that we must take for all procedures where your spatial knowledge is more than the patient's knowledge. But for general knowledge, there is no need for such consents. So I am not advocating this. But those of you who are taking it, I don't say no also, you can continue doing whatever you are doing. Compulsory work. That is second issue which we are facing today, compulsory work. There are orders from various municipal corporations or government, and they are forcing you to work. Can they do that? Now, well, there is a Disaster Management Act of 2005, and there is now one, this act. If you see the provisions of this act, it says, and it gives power to the person who is appointed for disaster management. They can do whatever possible to control the disaster, and they can take appropriate action for against those who are not doing it. Disaster Management Act section 51 says that those who refuses to comply with any direction given by authority under this act be punishable with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year with fine or with both. And if such a obstruction or refusal or comply with the directions result in loss of lives or imminent danger thereof, be punishable with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 2 years. So person is supposed to comply with the directions given. First thing. There is one more act which is in operations now, that is Epidemic Disease Act, and it is notified again recently as with the clause added for the violence in the hospital and violence with the medical staff. So that is the Epidemic Disease Act. So it says that if the the person who is in charge, and there is a some epidemic going on, if somebody do not follow the instructions given by the person in charge, it can lead to a punishment under Indian Penal Code, and that can lead to a punishment of 1 month of imprisonment or 200 rupees fine, because this is old act, or it may extend to 1,000 rupees fine and 6 months of imprisonment. So this is what is mentioned in this two act. But however, the only defense for not working or not following or not complying can be the health issue. And if there is some health issue or any justifiable reason, you can definitely say no for working. Like, nobody can be forced to work against their own personal safety. And that is why in the Andhra Pradesh High Court, this case was filed recently on 24th March. And what was said here, the doctor was given an order to work. The doctor refused, and ultimately she filed a writ petition that there are no enough PPE and safety instruments and equipments for their own safety. And the court said that the state government shall ensure to provide all necessary equipment like N95 masks, sterile medical gloves, starch apparels, patient protection equipment, and all other necessary things to the doctors, nurses, ward boy, and paramedical staff. It is also observed that on receiving the said personal protection equipment and accessories, the doctor, nurse, and other paramedical staff shall make proper use and ensure their due services to the citizen. So, court is also favoring when the things are not there, because according to Article 21 of the Constitution of India, the life of a person is of paramount importance, and that is why the lockdown because the life of the citizen of India is of paramount importance. No work but pay to the staff. That is what even our Prime Minister Modi also said, you have to pay to your staff. And there are such instructions given from the Labor Department that you have to continue paying your staff, and what to do in such situation. If the place of employee has been made non-operational due to COVID, the employee of such unit should be deemed to be on duty. This is what is mentioned in that order. But it is said now from the Labor Department that, and there was an order from government of Gujarat for the first time and from Central Labor Department as well, that if a service is essential and allowed to function during lockdown time and the staff doesn't attend the duty, then that staff can be considered as on leave without any intimation, and the actions can be taken under labor laws against that staff. Whenever there is medico-legal problem, always consult your medical colleague, your legal advisor, that is the advocate, or a medico-legal person. You have to take advice of all three of them, the medical, legal, and medico-legal person, to have successful outcome. The sixth thing, to be safe from 100% safe from medico-legal problem, which I did not tell in the beginning, is you can start your band, you can become a photographer, you can join Bollywood, you can join some Sadhu Baba, or you can join the out gang. You can become gangster. So you have to think about alternate profession, and you have to run away and leave medical practice. Then you can be 100% safe from medico-legal problem. But this is not possible. So I always tell that you may learn some asana to diagnose your own piles. This is lockdown time, and if you follow Baba Ramdev, you can do this. But it is impossible to be 100% safe from medico-legal problem while being in a medical practice. So take it as a professional hazard. Do not fear. Do not keep concentrating on a problem which has happened. You may harm the other normal case. Do not panic. You are going to get shock like this during your practice. Do not compare yourself with other colleague. If he has come out successfully, like we have seen two cases. In first case, the colleague was given a clean chit by Supreme Court, while in second case, the compensation was awarded. So do not compare yourself with other colleagues. Everybody has their own fate of their case. Just continue your journey, not only walking, but dancing like this baby. And last slide is, as Justice Katsu, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, had said, law is a watchdog, not a bloodhound. If reasonable care is taken, doctor will not be held negligent. So doctors need not worry. Thank you very much for patient hearing. Thank you. I think now we can take the question answers. Hello.
Abhishek? We'll be taking now question answer session, so that we'll just go through the questions that have come. What is the question?
Hello.
Can you hear us, Abhishek? Can you put? So the first question is, can we put no deliberate attempt is made to look at the fetal anatomy or to do the structural survey in this USG if we are not doing anomaly scan, or in all scans other than anomaly scan?
See, that will be your defense, but you cannot write that no deliberate attempt was made. You can say this scan was for growth or this scan was for Doppler. That will form your defense. But if something is very obvious and you miss it, then again the case can go against you. I will give you one example of a case of a pathologist where the slide was sent for malarial parasite and the pathologist missed the cancer cell. It was quite obvious from that slide that patient is suffering from cancer. So he put these words in his defense that I was not told to see cancer cell. But the National Commission decided the case in favor of the patient that this is quite obvious. And it is when the slide is given to you for malarial parasite, if something is very obvious which your colleague could have picked it up, it is not justifiable defense that I did not look at it. So this is, I think, I hope this is the answer. res ipsa locator principle.
So the question has changed.
The question, res ipsa locator also applies in the second case. Then why different decision? See, why different decision? I am telling. I told you in the beginning. It depends on what arguments you have put, what judge you have put it before, how the complainant has filed their complaint. It is always different in a different situation. And you have seen in the same case also, the state commission gave decision against the doctor. The National Commission gave decision against the doctor. The Supreme Court gave decision in favor of doctor, and it stopped there because there is no court above. Otherwise, it keeps on going. So it depends from judge to judge, from situation to situation, from pleader to pleader. It differs. So it is ultimately your documentation and your convincing power to the judge which works.
There is this one question as to how to disinfect USG probe. I have already answered in my presentation, but I'm just repeating that there are many LLDs available, that is low level disinfectant for probe itself, that is dilute Sidex, 10% bleach, and many more. Sterilium is also one which contains 75% alcohol, which can be used for probes. But again, as I mentioned in my presentation also, that you have to check with your USG machine vendor which one is the safe one, because you know that the probe can get damaged by these LLDs, and therefore the one which is approved by your machine vendor should be used for disinfection of USG probe.
If fetal medicine consultant doing scan herself is pregnant, can she take leave on ground of her? That again depends. As I told you, in both this act, it is mentioned that if you will found convict, then only the punishment will be given. So it is left with the court. If you can convince the court that yes, it is an immunocompromised state and I cannot come for the job, then the decision will come in your favor. But if you cannot prove it, or if government proves, or your employer proves that there is enough protection for pregnant employee as well, and still you did not come, then the decision will be in their favor. So it all depends how the case goes. There is no rule of thumb, but yes, it is a justifiable excuse from the job.
Okay, then this question is for you, Hitesh. What about filling PNDT forms? Is it not dangerous handling paperwork between staff and patients?
And so that is why there is one circular which has come from the PNDT department. They said all the reports you have to submit, or you are supposed to submit by the end of the fifth day, before the end of the fifth day of the next month. You have to submit it by July now, June now. So if you do formalities of the forms later on, it is allowed, not a problem. It will not be considered as an offense.
This you have already answered. So which are the other questions? If our staff gives any history of common cold or respiratory problem is hidden, the question goes away. Just a minute. Common cold or respiratory problem is hidden, not informed to the authority, the license will be cancelled. How one can know asymptomatic carrier and predict the evolution? That is the problem. That's what I mentioned, that when you take the history from the patient, you have to try before the patient enters the clinic.
Yes,
so when your staff is trained and the staff is asking the history about whether the symptoms are there, or TOCC or is there or present or not, but then you can never be 100% sure about the carrier, asymptomatic carrier, and therefore you have to take every patient as a carrier and take all possible precautions to prevent infection to you and to your staff members. Next question is,
can requisition for ultrasound be shared digitally in these times? As far as the PNDT is concerned, you must have a printed copy, so you can take the printout of the same and you can keep. Yes, that will be accepted in present time if somebody takes an objection.
This is again for you, Hitesh. How to communicate to the mother about ambiguous genitalia of fetus or posterior urethral valves or fetal ovarian cyst? I think they are talking about sex determination.
The PNDT Act is not it is there to regulate and not to prevent sex detection of the sex in cases where it is required to. In Form F itself, it is mentioned that when there are sex-linked disorders, you have to mention it. Except for such cases, you are not supposed to tell the sex. So whenever there is some anomaly, you have to diagnose it, you have to put it, and that is what is the purpose of doing sonography. So you have to put it in the form, you have to write whatever anomaly it is, if it is fetal ovarian cyst or if it is posterior urethral valve, you have to mention in black and white in the report. Otherwise, you will be charged with negligence charges because this is what the patient is paying you for.
Okay. The next question is, I am private gynecologist not wanting to continue practice due to COVID pandemic. Can I stop practice during this pandemic period as I am asthmatic?
See, in private practice, you can stop your practice, no problem. Nobody will question you. If somebody will, you will be in a better winning position. You can always tell that I don't have enough equipment, instrument, or enough facilities to provide protection to all my staff and patients.
Can a pregnant nurse choose not to report for work in COVID times?
See, if it is nurse or if it is a sonologist, the implications are same. I already answered that. So whosoever is pregnant in the eyes of law, they all are same. They are employee.
I think next we have to look at the next page. Is it? Okay.
What if fetal medicine
That you
consultant?
have already
That you're saying.
answered. Down, below. There's one question. SFM.
Please repeat.
SFM guidelines are very elaborate guidelines. The question is SFM guidelines, madam, can you please repeat? Now it is elaborate. Almost my half of the talk was based on SFM guidelines. It gives guidelines right from triage of patients, whom to scan, the 3 categories of patients, that is scans which have to be done without delay, scans that can be delayed, and scans that you can avoid completely, these 3 categories, and how to triage the patient, then how to use different LLDs for your sonography room, for your machine, for your probe. So detail, and in fact my entire presentation will be included in that. Then another question is,
give talk on PCP and DT Act and its pitfall.
Somebody wants you to talk on PCP and DT and its pitfalls. Definitely, he'll be
definitely
there.
You have to request to Lilac, and they will do the rest.
Arrange for the talk. As you said, the virus may persist in USG machine for up to 96 hours. Yeah. So can we increase the frequency of scan every 5 days, despite going daily? And that will be possible only for few days. How many days you will be able to do scans? Only on the 5th day. And second thing is, when you are doing the scan on that particular day, how many patients you are seeing, whether 8, 10, 15, 20, every patient will have the chance of getting infected from the previous patient. So you have to do things with all due precautions. As I said, you have to change the sheet, you have to clean the couch of patient, you have to clean the machine, probe after every single examination. That is not going to change even if you do scans on 5th day. So, and how long you'll be able to work every 5th day? If it is practically possible, fine. Maybe because for our N95 mask also, they are saying that you have to make 5 folders and use the first on the 5th day so that the virus dies by then. But then practically for sonography, I don't know how long you'll be able to carry on like that. Okay.
Submitting PCP and DT form at the end of the month or July at present situation is okay, but collecting info and taking signature now definitely a threat. See, this is the threat, and we have to work with the threat. Well, forget the taking information and writing. When you are doing scan, there will be more threat. While not only while putting things on paper. So when you are going to do scan, why to scare about this paper? I mentioned that in consent part, because when we are doing OPD consultation, people are taking that consent. In OPD consultation, you can just talk with the patient and give some medicines. So you have to decrease that paperwork. When you are taking patient actually for some surgery, you are definitely taking consent for surgery as well. If you are taking patient for sonography, you are definitely going to put probe on the patient herself. So why not? If you have that much fear, then don't practice. But otherwise, you have to take proper precautions and you can always practice.
Okay, so the next question is, should we avoid transvaginal sonography in threatened abortion and other related viability scans in first trimester? In fact, I very categorically told in my talk that SFM guidelines includes transvaginal sonography in the category in which it can be avoided completely. So I know that it cannot be avoided completely, but definitely in threatened abortion patients and first trimester scan, you all know that with full bladder, if you scan, you'll be able to do trans-abdominal scan. So in such cases, we must not do transvaginal sonography and should just do trans-abdominal sonography. I hope I have answered that query.
The Form F signature from patient compulsory during COVID time due to paper handling. Again, I am telling you the same thing. If you fear paper handling during COVID time and transmission of the COVID for signature part, how are you going to do the scan on that particular patient? You have to minimize it, but when it is required, you have to do it. Ordinance of HCP is non-bailable if booked. What is the minimum period of remand? Can the magistrate give bail immediately? Sir, non-bailable doesn't mean that there is no bail. Non-bailable means the bail you have to get it from the magistrate, and magistrate gives bail based on the integrity of the person. If that person is charge sheeter, if there is a possibility that person will flee, if the possibility that person will leave India, they may not give the bail. But the thing is, he has to appear before the magistrate to get the bail. That is the meaning of non-bailable offense.
Okay, the next question is, 20 weeks pregnant had history of chicken pox at 18 weeks. At what gestational age should she undergo scan to see whether the fetus is affected, and what type of scan she should undergo in this lockdown period? Now, this is a very interesting question, which touches upon many aspects. Number one, if the patient has got chicken pox, first thing is chicken pox affects the baby the most, and then the most severe form when it is when it's around 36-37 weeks or around the labor, when the patient is already having chicken pox just 5 days or a week before the labor starts, or around delivery time. That is the time when the baby gets the most severe infection as far as chicken pox is concerned. But yes, of course, if the patient has a history of chicken pox at 18 weeks, you would like to monitor that baby, because you never know which baby, even the small percentage, would be affected. Now, another fact about viral infection or any kind of torch infection is that the fetal infection occurs or the amniotic fluid shows positive virus 4 weeks after maternal infection. So if at 18 weeks the patient has got chickenpox, the fetal infection would start after 22 weeks of pregnancy. But again, the sonography signs are very variable. They may or may not be seen on scans, and at any weeks of gestation, if the baby is infected at 22 weeks, that doesn't mean patient will start showing all intracranial calcification and intra-abdominal calcification and ventriculomegaly and everything. We should start from 22 weeks onwards. No, it is not like that. In some babies, it may not show at all. In some babies, some of the signs will be there. In some, more signs will be there. At what weeks of gestation it will be seen will also be very variable, and therefore to deal with torch in fetus is very tricky situation. Counseling of the patient is very important. That fine will, after the lockdown is over, at around 26-28 weeks, we would like to look at the fetus and we will try and find out whether any signs are there, and depending upon that report, again the follow-up has to be done. How can you sanitize the probe cord? It has to be done with the same. If you're using sterilium for the probe, for the cord also it has to be done. It is said that if you have a disposable cord cover, as the laparoscopic surgeons have, that can also be used, but at present they are very expensive. So if you can get those probe covers, that is also good, which has to be changed after each patient. Draw sheet, disposable paper sheets are available these days, so you can use those and just throw out of after each examination. Okay, so that question is over. Next is, should we avoid transvaginal? That I have already answered. One more thing about transvaginal sonography, as far as the probe is concerned, that when you are doing transabdominal, either you can use, again, there are some transparent plastic covers are available, which can be used for transabdominal also, but for transvaginal, we are using usually condoms as covers. So use double condom for transvaginal, if at all you have to do transvaginal.
In COVID time, can we mention in consent form, there are few asymptomatic carrier which could be,
What is the question?
which could not be detected at present. As I told you, for consent, I don't advocate such consents. It is implied consent and there is no need.
Abhishek, the questions are just pouring in. I hope we can continue with the questions. Hello, Abhishek, can you hear us? Because the questions are just pouring in.
The recent ICMR guideline mentioned that all pregnant patients nearing term residing in around containment area should undergo testing for COVID-19. If our area does not have that facility, should we refer out all such patients? Bela has already answered that these are patients in Cat B group, and you have to refer if you do not have facility to deal with the COVID patients.
Any positive history of either symptoms or TOCC. That is first thing that you try before the patient enters in the clinic. That time itself, you can decide whether this patient is fit to come inside the clinic or should be referred to COVID center.
Continuation of the chicken pox.
If the USG is showing anomaly in the fetus, can she undergo termination at that gestational age?
Okay.
Well, after 20 weeks of pregnancy, our legal system in India doesn't give us permission for the same. So it becomes a medical legal issue here. And then at present, we have to go to court and take permission for termination. Without that, we cannot touch.
Insurance benefit of 50 lakh. How will you prove that you have been infected while treating the positive patient? Do you mean that it will be applicable only COVID designated hospital? See, that depends on your state, what your state has said. The state has come out, various state has given various schemes. Any doctor is infected with the COVID, they have, and that's the one who is working. They have said that they will, and if he dies, so you don't have to prove anything because the 50 lakh will be given to the family, not to you. You are already dead. Then only you can get this 50 lakh rupees. So it is, you can always say that the doctor was working. The family can always say that doctor was working, but you were working, that you can always prove if they deny giving that money. But usually they will give, I think it is ex gratia money that they have said.
It is this question again is for you. Is there some book which will help us to know about legal aspect regarding obstetrics and gynecological practice?
See, I always tell that there is nothing like legal aspect of obstetric and gynec practice. The legal principles are independent principles based on the subject which is called law, and it is applicable to each and every person equally. So just like I will give you an example. If you say drive without helmet, whether it is Scooty, whether it is Bullet, whether it is ESD, whether it is Hero Honda, the punishment is same. Similarly, if you do negligence in gynec practice, in orthopedic practice, in urology practice, the implications are same. And the book is simple legal book, law, you have to understand. But still, whatever guidelines or whatever lectures we are giving you tips how to be safe. I just gave you example of negligence, how court will look at it. So that is how you can start understanding the law.
Okay, so madam, routine scan, is it required to wear protective clothing for sonologists? If so, should it be discarded after each patient? As I said, in a small standalone establishment, we are supposed to take only asymptomatic patient without history of TOCC. So in that, as far as guidelines are concerned, they are just telling you to wear hospital clothes and the surgical mask and gloves. These are only the three things which are advised as far as the guidelines are concerned. But for our safety, if you are using a over the hospital clothes, if you are using a gown, that need not be changed after each patient. If it's a good practice to use double gloves and change your gloves after each examination.
Is there any need to take consent that patient may get infected in hospital with COVID? I think I have answered this in my talk, but you must have logged in late. I don't advocate that consent personally. That is the shortest answer I can give. The best webinar I have attended during the lockdown. Thank you. I think this is not the question.
Somebody has complimented both of us.
Thank you very much for the compliment.
Okay, so should we take more questions, because they'll, I think, continue till night. Ordinance for
So I think we have now there is one
answered
more
most
page.
of the queries.
Ah.
There's one more.
I
Next
think
question.
there are no more
Please
questions, or it is
repeat.
just a repetition. You
Yeah.
all have my contact number, or you can have my number, and you can ask me or Dr. Bela for her topic and me for my topic, anything which you find later on also. And we are always available to help colleague, and we have nothing but the time.
So I think, Hitesh, it was a fantastic. We also enjoyed the session thoroughly, and we would like to thank Lilac Insight for having such a relevant topic in this COVID era.
Yes.
So, what do you have to say?
Yes, it is very relevant topic, and we are thankful to Lilac and the arrangers and organizers for this webinar. And for all of you, you are flooded with the webinar, but still you prefer to come here and listen to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay safe and stay home.